Terrific. All right, thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen and share screen. Okay. All right, I'm not able to see the screen. Could somebody unmute and tell me whether or not you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it, but if you can minimize, minimize that. Okay, now we're good. We can see your PowerPoint or your slides.
Right, okay. And it looks like I'm not able to see the chat at the same time, which is okay. All right. I'm going to start, and for this presentation, I'm going to need participation. So if everybody could unmute, it looks like we have a small group, so I think it's really great that we'll actually be able to talk more. And I want to share the presentation with examples of what is critical media literacy, what does it look like in the classroom, what's some theory behind it, and how can you do some activities. So I've got a lot here. And at any point during this, please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. I don't mind stopping at all to talk and explain or answer anything, okay? All right, I'm gonna go get started. I wanna start with an alphabet because oftentimes when we talk about literacy, we think about an alphabet as the way we teach literacy. So this is a media alphabet with the first letter being from either a product or a brand or a logo, right? So I want to do a quick little game where I'm going to just call out the letters one at a time. And when I call out the letter, please just out loud, unmute, tell me what the product or brand is that it comes from. So the first one, A.
Amazon.
Amazon.
Very good. B.
Barbie.
Great. C.
CNN.
D.
Disney.
Disney.
Good. E.
Entertainment Network.
Very good. F.
Facebook.
G.
Google.
All right. H.
Honda.
I.
Oh,
IBM.
Good. J.
Failed vaccine Johnson & Johnson.
Nailed it. Very good. K.
Kellogg.
Good. L.
Lego.
M.
McDonald's.
N.
Netflix.
O.
Obama.
P.
Pinterest.
Good. Q.
What time?
R.
Reese's Pieces.
S.
Skype.
Good.
Skype.
T.
Tesla.
Great. U.
Univision.
Oh.
It's an airline.
Airlines.
Western.
United. Very good. V.
Visa.
Good. W.
WordPress.
Good. Let's see if I can move this. Whoops, here we go. W. X.
Oh, that's Wikipedia.
Yeah, Wikipedia. X.
Wikipedia. Xbox.
Good. Y.
Yahoo.
And Z. Any idea? Z?
Zoom.
All right, very good.
Okay.
Oh,
The latest brand that's kind of taken over, right? Very good. So as a group, we were able to name every one of these where all I did was show you a single letter. Why is that? What's the reason we were able to name the product or the company for all of these?
I think because we always see it all the time.
Absolutely. Very good. It's repetition, right? This type of advertising and marketing is all around us and it's repeated over and over. And they do this and they pay, millions of dollars to do this because they know is that repetition creates memorization and internalization so that when we look at these things, we don't even read it. We just immediately know. We hear the tune. We know what it's selling, right? One of these is different from all the others. So look at the list, the letters and the different companies and products and brands. What is selling something different than all the others? One of these is not the typical product that we think of being able to buy.
The Obama Foundation?
Very good. Yeah. Obama, right? So Obama is a person. He was a campaign, part of a political party, became president. Typically, we don't think of that as a brand, right? So the year that he won the election, the very first time, his advertising campaign actually won the very top award internationally for best advertising in the world. He beat out McDonald's, Coke, Pepsi, every other company. So think of what it means when our own political process becomes part of this marketing world of consumption and branding. I think this is, for me, an example of why there's a problem of overconsumption, consumerism, but there's also a problem of the marketing of our democracies and our politics. And all of this is kind of blending together, morphing into this one big system of media. And I think we need to be helping students think more critically about this. And so that's what the work I'm doing in critical media literacy, and I want to share with you, is intending to do, is to try to help empower our youth to think more critically about all the messages that they're getting, that they're playing with, and that they're creating. So let me share with you a little cartoon. From the TV, lose pounds, lose inches, erase wrinkles. From the magazines, shape your abs, shape your arms, shape your rear. From the billboards, change your hair, change your nose, change your eyes, change your teeth. And from the person across the table, I like you just the way you are. What's that supposed to mean? One of the reasons I like this cartoon is because it gets at the difficulty of our relationship with media, is that it's not a simple thing that you see an ad or you see a piece of media and you immediately do whatever it shows. We're not influenced like that. We don't see an ad and immediately have to go buy that product. And yet, just because it doesn't have a direct immediate effect doesn't mean it doesn't have any effect, because we are seeing, like what we just did with the alphabet, that we are learning things from the media every day. And so it's this difficult relationship, and especially for educators and parents, if you think about, well, how do I help my kids, my students, maneuver this world when it isn't something I can say, see this, don't do this, right? Or see this question. And so I'm going to take you through a couple activities to try to kind of explore ways about going about teaching this with youth. I have another activity, and so please unmute again and tell me, I'm showing you this screen, this is my text. If this is my text, what do you think my message is? What's the message you think that I'm trying to send here? Any guesses?
Stand out.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Can I hear another guess? Any ideas?
That means absolutely nothing to me.
Okay, good. Nothingness. That could be the message, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in order for everybody to know what I intend you to know, you need something. What do you need? If this isn't enough, what do you need?
Clarity, more.
Good.
More.
Good.
Something that gives
Absolutely.
more context.
More information.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. So let me give you a little bit more information, a little clarity. How about now? Is it working yet? How about now? What do you think? Very good. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the point of that activity was just to emphasize how important context is, because oftentimes we focus on just the text and forget the context is also part of that equation of how we read the message, right? So it's really important, especially as we're working with students, is to remember whatever text we're giving them, whether it's actually a book, a textbook, or whether it's a photograph or a song, that's never on its own. It's always interacting within all these different contexts. And so we also need to be helping our youth think about what are the different contexts in play here that are also informing me about this message. Let's do it again, this time with a photograph. So we're going to say this picture is my text, and I'm giving you context. These 3 pictures around it are the context. Using that context, tell me what's the message you get from the picture in the bottom right corner.
Join the Air Force.
Okay, good. Do another thing now. Look at his mouth and tell me, when you look at his mouth, what do you feel? Because a lot of times pictures speak to us on a more emotional level. So what's the feeling you get when you look at his mouth?
Everything's all right.
Yeah, he's happy. He likes what he's doing.
Positive.
Good. Yes, very good.
Courageous.
Good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm only going to change the context, and we're going to keep that same picture in the bottom right corner. Now with this new context, how do you read that picture in the bottom right corner?
Ooh.
Yeah, not good.
All right, it changes a lot, right? And look
Wow.
at his mouth. What's the feeling you have now when you just look at his mouth?
Like sinister. Like,
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
A villain.
Yeah. So the point of this activity is just to emphasize the role of context. Because, ooh, what happened? No, hang on, I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay, because context is really important in terms of how we communicate and read messages. So what critical media literacy does is it's trying to do 2 things. One is to reshape our understanding of literacy to be more expansive. So the idea here is to expand the notion of reading and writing to include images, sounds, ads, social media, popular culture, all the different ways that we communicate. Okay, that's one aspect. The other aspect is to deepen this analysis, to deepen the ability to critically analyze the relationships between knowledge and power in society. These are the goals of critical media literacy. There's a researcher in England named Robert Ferguson who uses the metaphor of an iceberg. And he says most people, when they're looking at media, whether they're watching a movie or reading a book or listening to music, they focus just on kind of that tip of the iceberg. They don't think much deeper about the media that they're interacting with. And he argues what we need to do is go below the surface and ask different questions. And so what critical media literacy tries to do is bring in new questions to the process and ask about ideology, economics, history, politics, and especially about power, about who's benefiting, who's being hurt. And he argues this is so important because we live in a world with a lot of problems. And if we're not questioning the way our world is being represented to us, then these problems are just going to be reproduced. And so the more that we can ask these questions, the more likely we can be able to challenge and disrupt some of the problems of racism, sexism, homophobia, environmental crisis, all of these different things that are just part of the structures and get reproduced in the media to support those structures. So critical media literacy involves struggle to challenge the dominant ideologies and the systems that make them seem like they're normal or natural. And I want to argue that they're not normal or natural, that they're constructed, that everything is made by people who make choices. And the more we can recognize what are these choices, we can then challenge and change the choices. So this is the framework we use. And a little bit later, I'll put in a link where you can download a PDF of this framework. And basically, when I'm working with teachers, I try to get them to understand the 6 conceptual understandings, these theoretical lenses on the left, so that they can use the questions on the right with their students. So working with students, we just use the questions. We don't talk about the big kind of understandings, because the goal is that through the process of the students asking and answering these questions, they're going to come to deeper critical understandings of whatever the messages they're working with. And the whole process of critiquing and questioning information is the bigger goal. It's basically about critical thinking. And we're just trying to see, how do we develop critical thinking so that people will be more likely, whenever they're engaging with any information, to just doubt and wonder and ask questions like, wow, well, who created it? How did they do it? Why did they do it? What are different ways, values and biases that this is showing? What's missing? These are the basic questions that we feel will really lead to a deeper, more critical engagement with information. So I'm going to take you through a couple examples. Concept number one says that all information is co-constructed by individuals and groups of people who make choices within social contexts. So it's a bit of jargon in there, but basically it's just trying to get at the simple idea that people make decisions about all our information. And so the more we can start to understand that things are not just natural and always out there, but that all of our information has been chosen by people over the years or recently, but it's always being reinforced and asserted by people for specific reasons. So here's a little kind of a trick question. You're watching a program about bears. What do you see most? What do you think? Let me see if I can get this video to play. Here we go. So if somebody could unmute and just share, what do you think? When you're watching a program about bears, what do you see most?
About their awareness of somebody being around. That's my first thing.
Okay. Any other ideas?
I think about them being protective of their cubs,
Okay. Cool.
like mama bear.
Yeah.
Their movement and their natural habitat.
Cool. So you're all talking about aspects of the bears, right? So that would be fair to say that when you're watching a program about bears, what you see most are bears? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I want to do is challenge that, because in reality, we're not seeing bears. I just showed you a bear. We know bears can be dangerous, and chances are nobody just ran out of the room, right? Because we all know they're not bears. We know that they're pictures of bears, but very rarely do we say that. And in our culture that's so accustomed to media all the time, it's almost like a silly thing to say, is to say, well, I'm seeing pictures of bears. It's like, well, duh, of course. But this is part of our cultural media landscape, that we no longer talk about the media and we just talk about the content, as if the media doesn't inform, shape, or influence at all the content. And this is what critical media literacy is trying to do, is kind of go back into this and say, wait a second, we need to be talking about the medium as well as the content, because the medium does shape and influence the content. So if we just think about this short little video of bears, if we're only talking about bears, we can't ask questions like, well, who filmed the bears? How did they film the bears? What are they not showing us about the bears? How is the music positioning us to feel a certain way about the bears, right? All of these questions can add to and deepen our understanding of that content about the bears. But until we start to recognize that the medium is also part of the message, until we recognize that, we're not going to be able to ask these other questions that I think really can give us much deeper and better understanding and better ways of seeing what's missing and what are the biases and what are the assumptions of the information that we're getting all the time. So that's a bit of the idea behind critical media literacy, is that we're looking at the medium as well. Okay. So the questions we ask determine our process of inquiry, and this is all about an inquiry process. I'm not at all proposing that we need to be telling students, this is good, this is bad, you're right, you're wrong. What we need to be doing is building the skills for them to be able to question and reason, ask ethical questions and deeper ways of making sense of the information that they're getting all the time, so that they're going to want to do this on their own. They'll have their own critical autonomy is what one of the founders of this work, Len Masterman, talked about back in the 1980s in England. He said, that's what we want, is students to take away this notion of critical autonomy, so when they're not with us, they're still going to be asking these questions and thinking more critically. So one question you could ask for the very first concept is, well, if we know it's all constructed, then we could ask, well, who are all the people making these different decisions to create this text? And I want to show you an example that was done with preschoolers. Vivian Vasquez, a teacher who was up in Canada at the time, she was working with 3 to 5-year-old children. And they came in one day and they were complaining about the Happy Meal, because the girls one of the girls was given a doll and she wanted the car. But the person at McDonald's said, no, you're a girl, you get the doll. And so she was complaining. She said, that's not fair. And the teacher said, great point. So let's analyze. Let's think about this. What is a Happy Meal? And on the board, the teacher put a little M and said, tell me, what's in a Happy Meal? And these little 3 to 5 year old children said, well, there's a hamburger, a toy, a bag, a drink, fries. The teacher says, wonderful. Okay. And what's in each one of these? What's in the drink? What makes the bag? And so with the students, they began building this web of deconstructing something that for the kids had been so natural. They thought, well, Happy Meal is just, it's just what it is. There's no parts to it. And they started breaking it down. A drink has flavors and water in a cup. And the teacher obviously guided the kids through this, but through an inquiry process where she was asking them, what's in this? What do you think? What's part of a hamburger? What did you see in there? And they continued to deconstruct and create this huge web. And the point of this is that she was highlighting and helping the kids realize something that knowledge they had, but not fully. Each person maybe had a little piece, but to bring it together and then to be able to name it gives you control over it. And what they were doing is they were recognizing all of the people and all of the decisions that create a Happy Meal. And once you're able to break it apart and deconstruct it, then you're able to reconstruct it. So if we're thinking that we hear that maybe a styrofoam is bad for the environment, we see that the drink is made with a cup and the cup is made with styrofoam, well, we can still have our drink, but that cup can be made with paper or with other material, and choices can be changed. And so it's really, I think, a wonderful understanding when we start to deconstruct things and see that human beings are making these choices. I'm a human being. I can make other choices. We have that power, and we can get in there to restructure our world when we can see how it was put together, and especially when we start looking deeper at why a lot of these choices have been made as well. So that's an introduction to the first concept of looking at all media is constructed, so we need to deconstruct it. And we can start doing that by asking who constructed it. And then this next question gets at how. So concept number 2 says each medium has its own language with specific grammar and semantics. So this is where we're trying to look at how is it constructed? How is it put together? When we think of languages, there are a lot of different languages, right? We have Spanish, English, French, Italian, but we also have other languages that we use all the time, like visual languages, sound languages, multimedia languages. And these languages also have their own rules, their own codes and grammar. But oftentimes we don't learn about this. We internalize it and we learn how to be influenced by it, but we're often not taught how to analyze it or how to use these as tools to create. So in the visual language, we need to be working with our students, talking to them about lighting, about the use of colors, about shapes and forms, about graphs, about icons and images and symbols. All of those are part of the visual language. The sound language, aural languages. There's people talking to each other like dialogue, and then there's narration. Narration and dialogue are very different. One is a voice we hear but we don't really see. There's sound effects, like what you're hearing right now, Foley. There's music. Almost every movie is made with some type of background music at some point, maybe running through the entire show. So the role of sounds also is a very important piece of the construction and languages. Another language is multimodal. Oops. All right, I'm going to stop there. I just want to give the idea that when images and sounds are put together, that then creates a whole nother type of language. And this is typically what we see in so much of our media is this integration of the editing and the ways that both work with each other. So again, it's another type of language. Then if we could think about just social media every different app has its different rules in different language, right? It's not the same thing to communicate on Instagram as it is with Pinterest or with Twitter or Facebook. Every different platform has its own rules. And the more we can help our students deconstruct these different languages, the more critical they'll be, but also the more power they'll have to create their own messages. So question number 2 is getting at how was this text constructed and delivered in Access. So the more we can help our students learn these different techniques of these different languages, the more likely they're going to be able to be critical thinkers without us, that critical autonomy. Okay, I'm going to jump to concept 4. I'm not going to cover all 6 concepts today. We don't have too much time, but I want to show you some clear examples. So concept 4 says media messages and the medium through which they travel always have a bias and support and or challenge dominant hierarchies of power, privilege, and pleasure. Here's the idea is that there's always a bias. And we've got to get beyond the notion that bias is bad to recognize bias is just an inherent way communication works. We're human beings, we're all subjective. We can't communicate anything without somehow expressing a bias. And that's an important piece for us then to start teaching students to ask, well, what is the bias? Is the bias good? Is it bad? How can I find the closest I can get to knowing what actually happened? What is the truth? What really transpired? Because real things happen. It's not a relativist thing saying, oh, well, we all have our different ideas. It doesn't matter. No, it's saying that there's always these different biases, but it does matter. And so because of that, I need to be far more critical in terms of asking about, what are the points of views, the values being represented, and what or who is missing. So one way I love to do this is starting with money. Just thinking about, well, our money is a form of media, right? And it's often a piece of media that we don't analyze. But who's on the money? What are the messages embedded in our money? All of that is our government's way of saying, this is what's important. And everything that's not on there is lesser important, right? So the fact that we have pictures of just dead white men on our money is a message that's being sent out to everybody who sees it. And yet not every country puts their presidents on the money. It doesn't have to be just presidents on our money. Our money could have anyone, but the choice that that's who's on our money was made long ago and is reproduced every day when we continue with this. So these are some of the messages that we want to start thinking about and wondering, well, how could it be different? Cartoonist in LA, Lalo Alcaraz, he did this fun cartoon. He said, are you counterfeiting money again, Cuco? Chill out, Eddie. I'm just submitting proposed redesigns for the new US currency. The government said they're finally adding some color to our bills. So this was back a few years ago when, they started adding a little bit of color to the green dollars. So he drew his own money with color, right? Dolores Huerta, Geronimo, Malcolm X, King, Chavez, people of color on the money. Why not? It doesn't have to be presidents. So thinking about that, I have students create their own money. We talk about just what I was sharing with you now, and I ask them, here's a blank piece of money. It's a template. Who would you put on? What picture would you put of what person you would choose to celebrate on your money? What symbols would you put there? What words or sayings would you put? And why? And so students take this and create their own money. And this is an example from, I think it was a second grade class where the students chose themselves. They put themselves on the money. They did their own symbols. They wrote their own sayings, be brave like a tiger and always trust in God, listen to your parents. Here's another example with older students who they chose to put on the money and then explaining why, whether it's King, Eleanor Roosevelt, Frida Kahlo, Mahatma Gandhi. So I think this is a wonderful way to teach the process of critical thinking through production, through creating, through making something as a way to demonstrate your thinking, your understandings, and your analysis. Another great way of getting at this concept of concept number 4, that recognizing the biases and the values, is comparing different types of books. And there's some wonderful children's books out there that take the traditional stories, whether like the Three Little Pigs, Jack and the Beanstalk, and they tell them through different perspectives, different versions. Now here's the true story of the Three Little Pigs told by the wolf, Jack and the Beanstalk told by the giant. These are wonderful ways for students to see that it doesn't have to be the way it is, that we can rewrite our stories. And this is also a great example to use with students when you're reading any book to them, to stop and say, okay, after we've read this book, who's missing? When we were watching this or reading this, whose voice did we not hear? And thinking about who was missing, and then going through a discussion and reflection about what do you think they would say if they were there? What are we not hearing? What are we missing from the story? Is a really important aspect of core concept number 4, because a lot of times simply what's not there is communicating a bigger message than what is there. And we see this a lot, especially with representations of any marginalized group. We have misrepresentations where they're represented really badly, and we have underrepresentations where they're not being represented and missing from the media. So the question that would go along with this concept is, what values, points of view, and ideologies are being represented, or what's missing from the text or influenced by the medium? And lastly, what I want to share with you are just examples now of what this looks like in schools, in elementary schools. So these are some pictures from my classroom when I was teaching 4th grade in an elementary school in downtown Los Angeles. All the students are second language learners. This was actually a bilingual classroom. And here's an example of a health education lesson I did, where in the first picture in the top right corner, the students were looking at advertising. And I pulled out all these different ads from magazines and just had the kids separate the ads into categories of techniques of persuasion. We talked about, the idea of famous people, testimonials versus, fun cartoons versus different ways that ads were, trying to convince people to buy or do certain things. So after they just sorted the ads into different piles, then I put up this string with ads from cigarette tobacco ads. Something that typically you don't want to do. You don't want to promote cigarette, but it wasn't about promoting. It was about challenging it and having the students use their skills they were just doing about looking at techniques of persuasion and seeing which techniques are being used here in these cigarette ads. And we also did part of the unit looking at just the scientific health effects and the dangers of tobacco. So it gave them something to contrast, the negative reality of tobacco versus the positive representations of the health and fun of cigarette smoking. After we did that, then I had the students think, we need to create some type of media. What type of media do you want to create to demonstrate what you've just learned here? And the students decided they wanted to create their own play. So they wrote their own play, created their own costumes and everything, and they performed this to kids in the school. So this was their piece of media as a way of demonstrating what they had learned. Here's another activity where we used the newspaper, and my students had to analyze the newspaper first by looking at just kind of the journalistic language arts skills of what are the different parts of the paper. And then secondly, they were learning English, so we were taking apart the words in the newspaper and using those to teach nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And then finally, the picture on the bottom, this is where we did the more critical media analysis. And I had the students cutting out all the pictures of men and women and comparing them. And so students were put into different groups for different sections of the newspaper. And they, on these big chart paper, they glued down the pictures of men and the pictures of women. And one thing they found right off the bat was, there were far more pictures of men than women. So we talked about that and analyzed that. And then we went a little bit deeper to talk about not just quantity, but quality. So what type of pictures? What are we seeing people doing in the pictures? And if you can see in the photograph, they wrote words next to the photographs. And what I asked them to do is write the word that shows the action. What is the action people are doing in the picture? Which is the verb, right? So we're writing verbs. We're building our language arts skills. but we're also critiquing and analyzing our current news media. And it was fascinating to see it, because what we ended up finding is that the pictures of women were far more passive. They were posing, they were smiling for the camera, where the pictures of men were much more active. They were doing things, they were involved in stuff. And so we ended up seeing the difference between passive and active verbs as well. There was a lot that came from this type of activity, where the students were the researchers using real current events as the platform for critiquing and questioning issues of gender, race, class, and other aspects of society. From Rethinking Schools, the editors write, if we ask the children to critique the world but then fail to encourage them to act, our classrooms can degenerate into factories of cynicism. While it's not a teacher's role to direct students to particular organizations, it is a teacher's role to suggest that ideas need to be acted upon and to offer students opportunities to do that. And so this, for me, is kind of a key aspect of what critical media literacy should be. It should be about analyzing and reading, but also about producing and creating, right? So when we teach people basically literacy to read a book, we also teach them how to write. So why are we not doing that with media as well? And what we want to do is expand our understanding of literacy so that we're reading and writing words on a page, but also pictures and music and media and movies. And they're using these new tools to create and demonstrate their learning and their reflections and their ideas. So here's some examples I want to share of products that students have created. And I want you to remember, we need to recognize that education is not about products, it's about a process. Learning is a process, critical thinking is a process. But we can use products and projects like this as a fabulous tool for getting at these deeper understandings of the process. And that's the idea behind it, is that we're creating these posters to demonstrate and to reflect and to practice the skills of critical thinking. So here are just two examples from social studies teachers where they created posters to highlight people who are missing from the history books. So here again is a way they can be looking, thinking critically about the stories that we're telling about us, about our history, but looking for who's not being highlighted, who's not being told. And there are a lot of other books you can look for, like Howard Zinn's A People's History, and different places where you can find mention of what's missing. But in the majority of our textbooks, you're only going to get that same kind of dominant narrative. And I heard the other day a speaker brilliantly kind of say, you know, in the US, we don't really teach American history. What we teach is American mythology, because we're not telling the true stories and the real facts. So much of our history lessons is about American exceptionalism and about the idea of who we kind of wish we were, but it's not necessarily who we are and who we've been. And so retaking and reclaiming history can be a powerful thing for students to be doing and learning in the process about all the way messages are constructed. Here's another example of some posters students can create. Students created these science posters for science about issues that they felt are important. And again, this is a place where students can be demonstrating their learning, their thinking, and be addressing issues and problems in their society, in their culture, in the community, that they feel this is a problem, we need to do something about it. So they can be creating real posters that they can be putting up on the school, around the community, or once, if they make it digital, they can be sharing it out on Instagram, on YouTube, on the internet. You know, there's so much more opportunity to share and to be an information creator today than ever before. And we should be using it, because these tools are being used all the time by others to exploit and to benefit and to profit off of us. We should be able to use this to push back and to empower our students, and to get them to realize that citizenship is about doing things and challenging. Here's an example of these posters that was done without any technology, where the teacher just printed out, you know, the paper as a template and had the students on a lesson she was teaching about cells. This was a 6th grade science class, and had them choose what part of the cell you wanted to do and create a wanted poster about that cell. So they had to draw a picture of it and just write a little bit of information. They put it up on the walls. The kids loved it. It was a really much more fun, interactive way of doing kind of the typical lesson of, you know, writing an essay or taking a test. Here's a way of using media and art to deepen that thinking process. Here's an example from second and third graders where they created wanted posters for their friends. The whole idea here, they had to photograph their friend, and then they cut out that picture, put it on a poster, and write all the good things, the nice things that you like about this person, to celebrate them. So again, decorating the walls with themselves with all these positive affirmations, can be such a powerful experience for children, and especially children of color who hear so many negative things in the media about them. But it's important for everybody. Here are some examples of using photography in the classroom. And I want to really kind of push the idea of thinking about how you could be using photography as a tool for teaching and learning, because we live in a different world today than when I was growing up. A camera and photography was something that was expensive, that not everyone could do, and it took forever. You had to pay for the film, for the developing, for the printing. We don't have any of those problems anymore. Today, almost everybody has a camera in their pocket, right? Almost all cell phones are able to take pictures, and we don't need to print it. We don't need to develop the film or even wait, a week for the pictures to come back. It's immediate and it's accessible. So what you see in the bottom left corner is a student teacher in a kindergarten classroom holding up pictures. The kids in that classroom, the kindergartners, took these pictures of each other. She gave them iPads and said, just photograph each other, whatever you're doing, whatever you see anybody doing, take these pictures. And then she went through the pictures they took. She printed them out just on a color printer right there. And then started showing them to the kids. These are second language learners, and she was teaching them about verbs. And she asked them, what do you see happening in the picture? What is Jose doing right here in this picture? The kids could name it, either in Spanish or English, and then she wrote the word up on the board in English, since it was an English language arts lesson, teaching them this is a verb, and this is how you say what we see happening. The kids loved it. They were engaged. It was themselves. They had taken the picture. They're seeing themselves in the picture. It really just made a lesson that could be really boring and abstract, fun and engaging. And so part of this can be very critical. Other parts of it are very engaging in improving just basic pedagogy. The picture on the right is students. These are second graders photographing each other from different camera angles. So they're learning about the language of photography, the visual language, by going through the practice of photographing different camera angles, looking up, looking down. And then the teacher talked to them a lot about that. He says, what does it mean to say I look up to a person? What does it mean to say I look down on the person? And how does that look in terms of pictures? What does that mean to us in terms of the power of language and words? A lot of critical potential through this. Another way we've incorporated photography is having kids illustrate vocabulary words. Instead of saying, here's the list of words, go look them up in the dictionary, saying, here are some words, get together with a partner, talk about the word, see if you can come up with an understanding, and then show what this word looks like in a photograph. And then we're going to show that photograph to the rest of the class and see if they can guess your word. And we're going to talk about the meanings that you're making of the language that you're learning. When students go through this, they internalize it. They learn it so much more deeper. Here's another example I love. This is from a book called The Best Part of Me by Wendy Ewald. And what she did is she was working with students with cameras and asked them to photograph parts of their body that they like. What is your favorite thing about you? And so they're photographing their hands, their hair, their feet, different parts of themselves. And then using those photographs then as a way of initiating a reflective writing process, whether it's poetry or just simply reflections. The students then would write about, oh, well, I love my feet, and this is why my feet can do this, and I run on my feet and all that. It's about helping kids look at themselves through a positive asset-based lens and using tools like photography as one way of getting them to explore and validate themselves and each other. And so here's an example of my student who was teaching, I think this was a second grade class in Baldwin Hills. and Los Angeles, and the students read the book first. It's a fun children's picture book. It's accessible. The teacher could read it to them. And then they created their own bulletin board where they took pictures of themselves, of each other, and wrote about what they love about themselves. Here's another way photography can be used. This was a middle school English teacher who was teaching the concept of protagonist and antagonist. And she had the students work in teams, choose one person in their team who'd be the subject that they would photograph, and they had to photograph that person to show what they would look like if they were the protagonist, what they would look like if they were the antagonist. So using all the different techniques of photography, like camera angle, lighting, clothing, facial expression, colors, all these things. And here's a fabulous example that one group of students did to demonstrate this. It was so much more meaningful than just saying, here's the definition, memorize it, the test is tomorrow. This is something they're going to internalize, and they're not going to forget after the test. And they're going to learn all these other skills through the process of creating. An interesting connection to what I just showed you that the teacher did, where the students were taking the picture, the good picture and the bad picture, is this example of what happened after Michael Brown was gunned down. People on Twitter started a hashtag, if they gun me down, because people were real pissed off the way the media represented and showed what pictures they chose to show of Michael Brown, almost as if they were justifying the police killing of this man, because look, this picture makes him look bad and in a way that maybe he deserved it, right? Which is ridiculous. And so these people on Twitter started posting two pictures of themselves saying, if the cops gun me down, this is what the media would probably choose. And they choose a picture of themselves where it doesn't look as positive. And then they said, but this is the picture I would rather they show of me. Really recognizing that I can be represented, we're all can be represented in many different ways. And there's a choice of how you represent does a lot, and it positions people to think about you in very different ways. This to me was a powerful lesson that I learned about how the simple project of just saying, photograph yourself, take 2 selfies of yourself, one where you look really good, one where you look really bad, however you want to do it, but in a way where we recognize the power of visual media to demonstrate who we are. And it's also a way of looking at, recognizing that people are reading us all the time, and what are the ways that they're reading us, and how do I want to be read? Here's another example of using photography, students exploring the community, getting out and just walking in their own neighborhood. So here's an example where it's a low-income neighborhood in downtown Los Angeles, where the media typically tells very negative stories about this area. That we only see news about Pico Union and the local newspaper when something happens, when there's violence, when there's an explosion or something goes wrong. And yet there's a lot of positive things there too. It's not all bad. And so what the kids did is they analyzed the media representations of their area, of their community, and then they went out with the teacher on walking field trips, photographing their community, interviewing people in the community, and then writing up and creating messages about it. So this was a ESL, English as a Second Language class, where the kids were learning English and learning critical media literacy. So I want to share with you, just in their voice, one of the projects.
Our strengths. In Pico Union, our strengths are greater than our challenges. We must use the positive aspects of our community to overcome the problems of the community. Arts, schools, programs, are resources, and most of all, the young kids can create change by using their education to create positive change.
And so this was done very simply with just cell phones and PowerPoint. They recorded their voices in PowerPoint. They uploaded the pictures from their cell phones here. They wrote it on paper and then typed it into the computer and created this multimedia project that they then later shared. Actually, they came to our university and shared it with us at a conference. It was fabulous. Other activities students can create. I mean, there's so much media that students can create, and they love it. When something is mediated, it's engaging. It's easier access than the typical way we so often require that 5-paragraph essay or studying for the test. Those should not be the only ways that students respond and demonstrate their learning. So here's just an example. This is using a program that's free online. It's called storyboardthat.com, where students created their own cartoons to address issues in the media. So the top one, the news anchor says, chlorine and alcohol have been proven to kill the coronavirus. Then at home, I should spray down my entire kitchen, make sure it is clean and free and virus-free as possible. And then he says, I should spray myself with this disinfection and maybe even drink some too, right? Giving a chance to talk about what are the messages, what are we hearing and seeing in the media, what are the problems here, how can we represent this and talk about these issues. The bottom one also, this commercial will be so inspiring to the younger audience. They love Kendall Jenner. Pepsi sales are going to skyrocket. Pepsi will become the drink of the moment. The advertising marketing campaign talking about how they're going to sell this, and that ridiculous ad from Pepsi. And then lastly, young girl saying, so a white girl is going to end racism with a can of Coke. Wonderful ways to use media. Here's another example, memes. Memes are sometimes silly, they're sometimes problematic, but they can also be powerful messages out there to challenge thinking. And they seem very simple because it's just an image with a couple words. And yet if you make a meme, you'll realize it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of critical thinking. And so I love putting students in groups and saying, here, we just talked about this issue of racism or sexism. Create a meme now that explains and demonstrates what you're thinking or your ideas about this. And students love it. Memes are things they're doing all the time. They're looking at them, they're creating them, outside of the classroom. Why not bring this into the classroom as a tool for improving and building critical thought? Digital storytelling is another way for students to include images with sounds. There's 1,000 ways to do this. There are a lot of programs out there. There's a lot of tools. I try to do it as simple as possible. So what I have here is just an example of students drawing pictures, storyboarding their idea, and then just recording their voice and the narration on top of it. And we do this just simply with PowerPoint. It's easy. Almost every computer has it. So these are different tools. You can also do it with Google Slides online. There are a lot of simple ways of doing this. I want to share with you one digital story that a kindergarten teacher did with a book. She had the kids work together. She read the story to them and then had them work together to summarize the story, retell the story, and then give a different ending to the story and do drawings, and then they recorded themselves. So I'm going to play for you that example.
This book is called Miss Smith's Incredible Storybook by Michael Garland.
First, a new teacher comes to school. He reads a pirate book to that class. Then the pirates come out of the book. Then she keeps reading and more characters from different stories come out and all gather together. Lastly, Miss Smith is able to get all the characters back into the book. Another ending will be Miss Smith coming back to the class and taking them all to another land, one from the book. They can go to different storybooks.
Okay, was that wonderful? I love the drawings. And I'm sorry, I was mistaken. I said it was kindergarten. It was actually a second and third grade class that did that. So here I'm going to share, this is the final example I'm going to show is the use of podcasts and having students create stories that are just sound based on oral media. Podcasting is becoming very popular once again. I mean, but basically it's the old radio shows that we used to have even before I was growing up. And it's exciting to see how this is reemerging. So it's so easy to create a podcast these days. And again, our cell phones have the ability to very simply capture voice. And so we can create audio podcasts just by using apps that come standard on most cell phones to record. If you don't have that, there's a lot of programs online you can download. Audacity is a great program. I think it's audacity.com. You can download onto your computer to record and also to edit sound. But there are a lot of tools out there to do this. So what I often do is have my students think about what are the concepts and ideas that we're studying. So here on the left, you see when we were talking about critical media literacy, we were looking at what are the different aspects of critical media literacy that we've been addressing in class. And then on the right, I list a bunch of different genres of radio. There's like news reports, there's advertisements, infomercials, there's music, there's weather reports, call and talk shows, traffic reports, all of these different ways that stories are told through the radio. So I ask my students, choose one from each list. Choose one concept that we've been learning, and then choose one genre of radio, work together with a team, and I'll give you 30 minutes to come up with a short podcast that demonstrates your understanding of this. Typically, this is something that the students love. It's fun, it's engaging, they can use their creativity, and they're taking the concepts to a much deeper level of understanding. So I want to share with you just one example that my students last quarter, university students in an education class, created.
Welcome back, folks, to Folk News at 8. We are live at the edge of the world, witnessing ancient history. Today, we find out if flat Earth is actually flat. Let's hear from the crew in the field. Henry? Hi, Trent. I'm live. Water's billowing onto the boat. They reached me. Yeah, Henry, it's getting pretty crazy. Thanks, Nicole. Let us know how he's feeling.
Hey, yeah, it's getting pretty foggy and cold down here. We're actually coming up on the edge now, I think.
Lost connection. What have you seen up there? We have lost eyes. We're coming up on the edge and they disappeared. We think they may have fallen off. Well, folks, we have proved here today that the Earth is. You heard it here, folks. Proof is in the pudding. Make sure you tune in. Was fake.
All right, so that's an example. And it can be done very simply in different ways with different age level students. My last slide is this. I just want to show a resource that we have. This is something we maintain at UCLA. I'll drop the link to this in the chat. And this is a guide that has lots of videos, podcasts, articles, and lesson plans for teaching critical media literacy. And if you see the list on the left, there's all sorts of categories looking at advertising, climate change, gender, sexism, journalism, news, all these different issues. You can find lots of great resources here. So let me stop screen sharing and let's see. Whoops, hello. All right, I'm back. And let me drop into the chat the link here. So there are the two links. One is to the framework that I went over, the 6 different concepts and questions, and the other is to that resource that I just shared with you. So it looks like we just have a few minutes left. Anybody have any questions? Is there anything I can answer?
I would just say this session has been really enlightening for me. Just the different perspectives. Mind blown. I'm definitely going to continue the research. Because yeah, there's a lot of things that you brought to the table that I didn't even really think about, and now I have an open mind. It's like unplugged from the matrix. So thank you for that, Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you. You know, for your daughter, what you might want to start doing now is collecting books. There's so many fabulous children's books that provide different perspectives, different ways of thinking. I have a whole collection of just different things. There's this wonderful book where you can just talk with her about feelings. There's a book about the Standing Rock and the water protectors. And the book was written and photographed by a kid, by an indigenous Native American boy who was there. There's a story about Columbus's arrival in the New World, and it's told from an indigenous boy's perspective. So, I mean, there's a lot of fabulous books out there that can be a wonderful way. They're fun, they're engaging, and they're helping your daughter start to see the world through different lenses.
Do you by chance have like a book list? Or
I have, yeah. Send me an email and I'll send you. I do have a little one, but yes, I'd be happy to share that. Any other thoughts or questions?
Good morning, everybody. Hi, Lynn here, Chin from Dallas. I'm really blessed and amazed to be a part of this conference. Thank you so much for all your tips and all the projects you've been sharing with us. I was thinking about biracial, Chinese, Hispanic. I have lived in Sweden. I have taught in Sweden. I did it for 5 years. I do bilingual classes. So meanwhile you were talking, I was just visualizing myself. I'm teaching 4th grade this year, bilingual. So I was thinking about, oh my gosh, all the things that is out there that we can't do with the media. You know, I'm thinking about my kids are one-on-one iPad. I work for Richardson ISD. So my kids are one-on-one iPad. And one of the concerns that we have is that they love to take pictures. And
Wonderful.
well, yeah, but you know, like you say, we can see things from a different perspective now.
Right.
And we're trying to block here and block there, and instructional time here and instructional. But I'm thinking about, wow, that's actually a great idea how we can use the media not only for entertaining, but for, you know, to provide students with tools so they can become more critical thinkers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And too often as adults, our thinking goes strictly to protection. No, it's dangerous. There are problems, but we've got to move beyond that to empowerment. We got to be talking to our kids. How can you become the leader? How can we support you to think and solve these problems that we're leaving you?
Yeah. I have a 13 years old and an 8 years old. So it's always, like you say, about protection, you know, how we can protect them from social media, how we can protect them from this. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Wonderful.
Well, thank you for your thoughts. That's wonderful. I'll put into the chat my email. If I can help you, anybody in any way, please just feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm more than happy to share resources or help you however I can.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and move us back into the main room, and I'm going to check on the other groups and get them moved into the main room as well. All right.
Terrific.
Hold on.
Thank you.